Hello, this is Gina Piscatelli with a lecture for Anatomy and Physiology 1 on histology, the study of tissues. You'll notice on this slide that I've got 4 pictures framed in an oval. The picture on the upper left is adipose tissue. On the upper right is blood, which we also consider a tissue. The lower left is epithelial tissue, most likely from skin. And the bottom right picture is skeletal muscle. So not all the magnifications are identical. For example, blood is highly magnified. So we're going to talk about these different tissue types in the body. And to begin, we want to look at what we learned in the first week of class, which is where does tissue fall in the hierarchical organization of the human body? So we learned already that an organism is made up of multiple organ systems. If I take just the digestive system, then the organs that are part of that organ system include the stomach, the liver to some extent, the small intestine, the large intestine, the cecum, the rectum, the anus, and the organ shown here is the stomach, but as you can see, all the organs are diverse. They're variable. Each organ is made up of individual tissues, not just one type of tissue, and each tissue is made up of multiple cells. And on we go to the smallest unit of life, I guess, which is an individual cell, but cells are composed of atoms, molecules, and organelles, of course. So the definition of a tissue, our focal point for today, is a group of cells that are of multiple types, but all the cells are similar in where they originated in the embryo. Not all cells will be identical. They won't be exactly the same within a tissue, but they will lend a certain structure and function to the tissue. So the different cells themselves might differ in detailed or finite structure and function, but together they cooperate to give the tissue a certain identity in terms of what it looks like and how it functions in the body. For example, if we just take nervous tissue, shown in the picture at the bottom of the slide, we see that, well, I should tell you that this picture has certain cell types fluorescently labeled. So the neurons are labeled in red, and cells known as astrocytes are labeled in green. Most likely the astrocyte's cytoplasm is not stained, but it's also round. So the green is really staining nuclei. The neurons clearly have this unique branching structure that's not present in the astrocytes. And so these two different cell types, although both part of nervous tissue, have different functions, and their structure does reveal or reflect their function, and we'll talk about those later. So overall, we have 4 different general types of tissue in our body, including epithelial tissue, muscular tissue, nervous tissue, and connective tissue. So within one organ, you may find all of these tissue types. For example, this is a diagram of the cross-section of the small intestine. And the small intestine is a hollow tube, and so we're only seeing the wall on one side of the tube. And the hollow part is called the lumen, the open part. So lining the lumen of the small intestine, we find epithelial tissue. And just beneath the epithelial tissue is connective tissue, including blood vessels, which is part of a connective tissue trait, and perhaps embedded neurons or nerves. So you even see little yellow neurons present surrounding the small intestine, so an element of nervous tissue. And then also in the wall of the small intestine are various layers of muscle tissue. So there's muscular tissue. And then usually surrounding the outside of an organ, you'll have either connective tissue or epithelium. So each of these general tissue types have kind of generalized functions or simplified functions. If we had to just come up with a short phrase for the function of each of these general tissue types, we would say that epithelial tissue covers, protects, either on the outside or the inside of an organ. Muscular tissue produces some kind of movement because it always contracts. It may not be movement of the entire body, it might just be movement of the heart or an organ like the stomach, but it produces movement. Nervous tissue controls other organ systems like muscles, glands, etc. And then connective tissue supports. So connective tissue is important in kind of tying things together, and it's the most widespread in the body. It has various functions because there's so many different types of connective tissue. Now, where we find these 4 general types of tissue also will vary. So nervous tissue is a little bit obvious, right? You're going to find it in the brain, the spinal cord, and nerves throughout the body. Muscular tissue or muscle tissue will be found in the heart. It'll also be found in muscles attached to bone and in the walls of organs like the stomach and the small intestine. Epithelial tissue is found lining organs inside the small intestine, also lining the outside of our body, our skin, and your lungs are made up of epithelial tissue. There's not muscular tissue in lungs, just epithelial tissue. And then connective tissue is found in many places. An example of connective tissue would be bone. That's shown in the bottom picture. And then ligaments, tendons, and also underneath the skin. So your lab manual as well as your textbook has a complete list of locations, but here are some that I think we'll encounter that are most important. So for epithelial tissue, we'll definitely be looking at the skin in both lab and lecture, and the lining of organs, including the lining of blood vessels. We'll also be looking at, well, we've already looked a little bit, but we'll look a little bit more at cavity membranes. So we learned about the peritoneum, the pleura, the pericardium. It has an epithelial tissue in it. And glands are made up of epithelial tissue. Muscular tissue, I've mentioned most of these. The walls of hollow organs and larger blood vessels have smooth muscle. The muscles attached to your bones obviously are made up of muscular tissue. The heart is made up of muscular tissue. And then here's all that widespread connective tissue. Tendons and ligaments beneath any epithelial tissue, including the skin. Surrounding organs. And then there's some specific types of connective tissue. The blood is considered connective tissue. So is the bone, cartilage, and the adipose that you find throughout your body, which is called fat, just commonly, right? So all these different types of tissue function together to form an organ, which contribute to organ system function and then the function of the organism. So we're going to learn about the different tissue types in subsequent online lectures. Thank you.